Bruchim habaim, welcome everyone. And moadim l'simcha, that's how we greet one another in the middle of this festival of Sukkot. This already feels like something special. Welcome to our guests and congregants who are joining us from home. We're gathered here in the Schwartz-Reisman atrium, and it feels good to be together in this circle. We have a lot to learn today from our guests, and we're so grateful to you for being with us. There are rituals to help us remember, and specifically, rituals can help us to remember home and homeland. So, for example, the stone floor that we have our feet resting upon now comes from Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem stone, so that we can remember our homeland in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel. There is also the ritual of land acknowledgement to help us remember that underneath these stones, there is the land on which Indigenous peoples have lived and made their home for millennia. So let me acknowledge first and foremost that the land that we are meeting on, this beautiful land, which we are blessed to call our home, is in the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Ishnabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. I've been asked to say a word about the festival of Sukkot. In some ways, it is an exercise in the spectrum of emotions. On the one hand, we call this festival Zman Simchatenu, the time of our joy, when we enjoy all of God's bounty with the fall harvest. And we share it with family and friends, and we take joy in their company. On the other hand, Sukkot is when we call attention to the fragility of life. And we are taught that no home is permanent and that we should take shelter in God's protection. And we do that by building the Sukkot, the little huts outside of our homes. And they are by design with thin walls and with leaky roofs. And so we are taught that joy can be found even in acknowledging the fragility of life. And that, in some ways, is the challenge of every human life, is to find joy even in the midst of the fragility of life. We are certainly heavy-hearted today as we mourn for the innocent children, the innocent Indigenous children who were taken from their homes. And we gather today in anticipation of what will be the first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, observed on Thursday. This is an opportunity for us to learn from one another, and I continue to be surprised and delighted when I find there are so many common threads that bind our cultures together. And one of them is that we hold in our left hand something yellow and something that smells beautiful. Because in our Jewish tradition, look what we hold in our left hand. This is the etrog. It comes from Israel. And I will, on behalf of everyone here, and later on, if you'd like to fulfill the mitzvah of nitilat lulav, by all means you can do so. These are the four species mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. And holding them close, we bind together the Jewish people from the four corners of the earth, and we wave them in the 6 directions, and you'll hear something that sounds a little bit like rainfall. And that's because at this season we pray that the rain will fall in proper proportion in the land of Israel and throughout the world. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al netilat lulav. Facing Jerusalem, facing the east. And now I hold something equally beautiful in my left hand. These are gifts that were grown at the garden of the Leo Beck Day School. We're so glad that Eric Peterseal, head of school, and Daniel Abramson, who's a masterful teacher at the school, has brought these from the garden. And it is my honor now to give these gifts, to present these gifts to Elder Catherine Brooks. I give them with gratitude and with humility. And this is the thing that comes before all things.
Having been given tobacco, we can begin the ceremony. May I take this off? I have a bit of asthma, so if I leave this on, I won't be able to talk. This is representing our council fire today. This is fire. Fire represents the life that is in every living being. This is sage. Sage is the third medicine. It represents caring and sharing. First medicine I will talk about a little later. I'm going to salute the four directions. We salute the east first because the east is where we say our people were originally from. The south, the north, oops, that's the west, and the north. I'll show you how to do this. This is how we do a smudge. Got it? It's heavy. So we're ready. We'll come to you, and you also may smudge. Bojo, Padaban Migazekwe Dijnakas, Dodam Bene, Nim Keke, Nimakali Anakwat, Nim Nishnabekwe. Nipissing Nadanjaba, Toronto Nadanjaba. I greet you in our language, and I've told you my Indigenous name, my spirit name. I am the eagle that flies at the dawn. My clan, I'm Bird Clan, and I am KK, which is the red-tailed hawk, and I come from Nipissing. I also belong to the Okali Anakwat, which is the Bear Medicine Society, and that's where I sit with the turtles in the Longhouse at Oneida Settlement. And I come from both Nipissing and Toronto because I was raised in both places. To Manitou, you hear us always, and you have many teachings for us to live by. And the 4 medicines are the ones I'm going to reflect on today. We have seen the sage coming around, and that is for caring and sharing. There is also the cedar. The cedar represents honesty, but not the kind of honesty that says I'm right and you're wrong. It is the kind that says, I will do you the honor of sharing my truth with you. We also have tobacco. Tobacco is the 4th medicine, and it is very powerful. It represents that strength, that faith, that belief that by following our traditions, we shall live meno b'madazen, which means good everyday living, as the Creator intended all of us to do, all beings. We are here today to remember and to condole. We are going to remember the children that have been found. Their spirits need that care, and they have been given that in their home territories. And today we remember. We are remembering those children who did not get to go home, both here and in Europe, for the very reason of who they were. For the very reason of who they were. That someone else could decide to take children from their families. And that happened to my mother and all of her brothers and sisters. We are also here to celebrate our healing, that we are continuing and will do so, because that is what the Creator has given us, this life that we have. Everything that is needed for life is here in this beautiful Mother Earth. There's nothing else needed than what is here. To Manitou and all good spirits, I ask you for healing and protection for all those we love and all those we remember and all those yet to come. For we live to prepare for those who are coming in new generations. So we have to bring our minds together in a good way to think 7 generations ahead, so that we can prepare for them to come. It's not an easy thing to do, but it is what we are obliged to do, as we are obliged to look after the land, because the Creator made us last. In our creation story, human beings were the last to be created, and we were put here, and all of the beings agreed to help us to live here. So why are we here? It is because we're supposed to be stewards of the land and to help one another. And we're here to learn about relationships. And to us, everything is a relationship. All things are in relationship. Even knowledge is relationship. It's you learning new things, and that creates a new relationship. Manitou, I ask you to help us in this ceremony, to help us to remember, to honor, and to condole, and to heal. We have this work to do in healing. Chimagwech, Chimanatu. Chimagwech. Miigwech, miigwech, miigwech. Nikanagana.
So now we're going to turn to part of our evening, which is to hear some stories of survivors, the children of survivors telling stories. First, I want to say that in our creation story, humankind is created last, and the Creator takes the first human and walks around the garden and says in the stories on creation that here's the garden in front of you, and it's up to you to maintain it. There's no one who will come after you to help repair it. It gives all of us a duty to be invested in this world around us. And our tradition says we also have to be invested in humankind, in each other, in maintaining the kind of world we would want to live in. A more recent teacher, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, wrote, "Morally speaking, there is no limit to the concern one must feel for the suffering of human beings. Indifference to evil is worse than evil itself. And in a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible. We who know we are also responsible share our stories, not because we think they are similar, not because we believe that being in the company of the miserable, of other victims of other tragedies, does away with our responsibility. We share our stories instead because you asked us to, so you could learn more about our people that stands with you, side by side with you today." In a moment, we're going to hear from Faye Greenholtz and Michael Rothstein, both children of survivors of the Holocaust. Not to compare. As the image of God is destroyed, the mirror we hold before humanity cracked and broken, no shattered shard is more holy than the next. As we turn to a very different, broken piece of our history, we begin to bear witness. We hold up a reflection now of broken humanity.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for having us here. And I am honored to be able to tell my parents' story. It's an honor to tell you their story and share with you. Before the evening started, I spoke with Catherine, and her mother's story is similar to my mother's story. My mother's story began before the war. She lost her parents, one of them when she was 4, and she had to go to a Polish orphanage. And so there she was put to work at the age of 4 with her sister because her mother, my grandmother, was a midwife and couldn't keep her and keep the family going because her father had died. My father also lost his father when he was 4 years old in Poland, and his mother ran a little grocery store and kept him and his 2 siblings going. Then he went to work when he was 10, didn't have much of an education, but became a tailor. Learned first how to operate a sewing machine and then eventually became more of a master tailor. So they had not great childhoods before the war. When the war came, my father knew that this was not a good thing, so he escaped to Russia. He went with his brother and sister to the border of Poland and Russia, and they returned because they had significant others. My aunt had a husband and 2 children, and my uncle had a fiancée. So my father was left alone and made his way through the war in Russia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, and eventually at the end of the war, he came back to his hometown, a very small town outside of Lodz, and nobody was alive. And so he was completely alone in the world. My mother was with her sister throughout the war. They were in the Lodz ghetto. During the war, they made straw boots for the soldiers, the German soldiers. Somehow they survived. In 1944, the last transport out of the Lodz ghetto, they went to Auschwitz. And they were marched back and forth from Auschwitz to Birkenau, and they survived to the spring of 1945 when they were liberated. And eventually they met up with their brother who had left and also gone to Russia during the war. And so they were very fortunate to have each other. My grandmother perished in the Holocaust. She was taken away early on because she was an older woman and she did not survive. So after the war, they were in a displaced persons camp in Germany, and eventually the Taylor's Project, which was presented here a couple of years ago, brought them to Canada because they were both tailors. So this is how they made their way to Canada, and they met in Winnipeg. That's where I was born. They met, they married shortly after meeting, and they had myself and my brother, and they worked extremely hard in a factory, a literal sweatshop, but they made their life in Canada, and we're very grateful to be here and not be persecuted anymore as they were in Europe. So I am grateful to Canada for having them here, and my brother and I have done well. We're both educated, and this was extremely important to my parents that we be educated. And thank goodness that this all worked out for us. My parents are both gone. To honor them, my brother and I started a scholarship in our high school in Winnipeg in their memory. And the scholarship is for an Indigenous child or the child of immigrants. And so this is the way to honor my parents.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's also an honor to be able to address you this evening. My own personal story, in fact, is very similar to Faye's, although we did not know each other as children and only met as adults. Excuse me. I think before I tell the personal story, it's important to put our personal experience into some context. Poland had a population in 1939, the outbreak of the World War II, of about 3 million Jews. Only 300,000 of those 3 million survived the genocide of the Holocaust. Historically, of course, the current land of Israel is the home of the Jews. In the first century of the Common Era, they were expelled from Israel after trying to overthrow Roman rule. They wandered throughout Europe for centuries, and eventually, as I said, the biggest population of European Jews made their way to Poland. When the war broke out in 1939, unfortunately, Poland was the first country that was invaded by the Nazis. The Nazis used the so-called Jewish problem and the need, in their view, to exterminate the Jewish parasite from Europe as one of the centerpieces of their exterminationist policies. They started in Germany, where the civil rights of Jews were restricted over a course of about 10 to 15 years. when they eventually invaded Poland and the rest of Eastern Europe, the restrictionist policies turned genocidal. And there was an express aim to literally wipe the Jews off the face of the earth. So obviously when Poland was invaded in September of 1939, it exposed the 3 million Jews in Poland, including my parents and Faye's parents and many others, to this genocidal policy. The policy started by ghettoizing Jews, slowly removing their civil rights, eventually incarcerating them literally in ghettos in the various cities of Poland and Eastern Europe, where they were exposed to extremely harsh conditions and intentionally allowed to literally die because of lack of food, medicine, heat, and all the other necessities of life. Eventually, there were systematic deportations to the concentration camps. And in my parents' hometown, which was Sosnowiec, Poland, and a neighboring suburb called Będzin, the deportations to the death camp started in 1942. My parents, both their set of parents, and I should have said that my parents did know each other as children and were friends before the war. They lost countless number of relatives to the extermination policies. My grandparents, many of my aunts and uncles, in other words, the siblings of my parents, perished as well. My father was incarcerated at Buchenwald. He was a vigorous young man of about 19 when the war broke out. And he was able to survive because he was apparently a very talented tailor, and he was needed to basically harness to the German war effort by keeping all the uniforms, etc., in working order. My mother at first did slave labor in her hometown, because this was another feature. Before the Jews were murdered, the Nazis used them for slave labor purposes, again in aid of the German war machine. Eventually, my mother was deported to Auschwitz, which was very close to her hometown. So, although our families did not know one another at the time, both my mother and Faye's mother did end up in Auschwitz. Again, they were relatively young. They were both 16, my mother and Faye's mother, when the war broke out, and they were able to survive because, not for altruistic reasons, but they contributed to the German war effort. As we all know, fortunately, the Allies were able to defeat the Nazis, and the concentration camps were liberated in the spring of 1945. And by a unique quirk of fate, Rabbi Splansky's father was a chaplain, correct? Grandfather, I'm sorry, I knew that, but it just came out wrong. Rabbi Splansky's grandfather was a chaplain in the U.S. Army, and he was among those that liberated the concentration camp that my father was imprisoned in 1945. So that's a special bond between us. My parents eventually made their way to Montreal. Rather remarkably, an uncle of my mother's who lived in Paris, France, was able to escape with his family to Montreal during the war, which was very rare. Also relevant to this discussion is that Canada had a very restrictionist immigration policy. There's a well-known book called None is Too Many, written by Professor Abella, the husband of the Supreme Court Justice, that describes the very restrictionist immigration policy. And this was not unique in the Western world. There were rumors of the Holocaust out there, and there was some reporting in the leading newspapers, but for a number of reasons, no Western governments did anything meaningful to stop the genocide. So my parents were sponsored by my mother's uncle. They made it to Canada in 1948. Now, Canada was still very much a society with deeply rooted anti-Semitism at the time. But fortunately, it was a relatively low-level anti-Semitism. So the immigrants, although they weren't accepted with really open hearts at the time, and there was even some opposition within the existing Jewish community, because the immigrants were different. They came with, they were readily Jewish, they spoke with accents. And some of the established Jewish community was a bit nervous about that, and they didn't want to. Jews at the time were extremely unwilling to cast attention upon themselves, and they wanted to blend into the environment. And for years, the Holocaust was not even discussed openly. It wasn't until the 70s and 80s that it really started to be discussed. But as with Faye's case, I was very fortunate. Our parents, even though there was anti-Semitism of a low nature, of a low type in Canada, they managed to carve a life, even despite their incredibly traumatic experience. They didn't scar us with their trauma. There are some Holocaust families where the trauma was effectively passed on. My parents were strong, and we grew up with, as relatively a normal life as possible. There was a big survivor community in Montreal, and they helped each other. And despite some of the misgivings of the established Jewish community, they did support the Holocaust survivors financially and with other services. So all in all, it is a happy ending for us after much, much trauma for the community. And I think in closing, I would just say that in some ways, in thinking about what I would say tonight, it occurred to me that it's kind of ironic that, perhaps the most maligned community in Europe that endured centuries of anti-Semitism in Europe, and eventually had to endure genocide. In Canada, ultimately we are accepted, but I do realize that a lot of those opportunities we had may not have been available to the Indigenous community, and it's rather ironic and deeply wrong that us, as the descendants of Europeans, although much maligned Europeans, we're nevertheless given advantages that you in the Native community did not have to just to participate according to your beliefs in Canadian society. So it's something to think about, that we wound up being relatively fortunate, whereas the Indigenous community is still to a large extent engaged in the struggle. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity of speaking with you.
All right. I'm taking this off again because, as I said, I've got asthma and I will choke. Okay. I'm going to pick up my feather and the tobacco. When I was thinking about what to tell you about my mother, I was so filled with love and sorrow for what she went through. When I was little, she too didn't burden us with what she went through. In fact, she told us about, the school and made it sound rather fun. As a matter of fact, when I was very little, and she made us sure we could read before we went to school. She liked to read. So I brought home a book which is called Madeleine. It's about a little French girl who is an orphan and lives in an orphanage. Some of you may have known that story. And because it was about Madeleine, I thought it was about my mother. I thought the residential school was like the adventures that little girl had. Yeah. If only it were true. As I grew older, she would tell us more things. For one thing, she had to kneel in the chapel with heavy books on her arms because she spoke her own language. That's why I don't speak my language, because she didn't teach me that. She made sure I could speak English well and read, because she felt that would be the best thing for me. And I'm grateful to her for that. As I grew older, she explained to me the differences, what happens with people when they look at us differently. I grew up during the time of the civil rights movement, and also with the Irish and the English fighting each other. And she said to me, I said, why are people doing this to each other? Why? I asked her, and she looked at me and she said, listen, look at how the English treat the Irish. She says, can you tell the difference between those people? And of course, being a smarty, I said, oh yeah, they've got different cultures, they have different languages, they have this and that. And she goes, look at them, do they look the same? And I said, yeah, they do. And she said, imagine what they do when they see somebody who's really different. She told me when she was in the residential school that it was hard for her to explain how this happened, but they would tell you things about yourself. So you knew you were the worst thing that it could possibly be, the worst kind of person it was possible to be, just by being who you were. She was there when she was very young. And one girl, they would run away. They would try to run away, the young people, when they got a little bit bigger. And she was dragged out of bed, all of them were, in their nightgowns and lined up on both sides. And they threw this girl down and they beat her and beat her and beat her because she dared to run away. You didn't run away after that, that's what my mom said. Or you sure as heck hope you didn't get caught. And the police would bring you back. There was nobody that would help you. There was no army to come and rescue us from those places. And in places they did terrible things to children. My mother never talked about that part of it until the night that she was passing, when she was going to die. And I heard her call out to her 4-year-old sister who was there. And all my mother's life, she had a sorrow in her because she couldn't protect her. She could not protect her 4-year-old sister. And those girls would say to her, your sister's crying. And if she went there, she would be beaten. And she couldn't get close to her. She'd have to go into another room. And when she was dying, she called out to her. We didn't speak English the same way as most Canadians spoke. When we said Agnes, we said Agnes. For Catherine, it was Gotneen. And my uncle used to say, hey, Got, come on with me. We're going to go for a drive. And she called out to her. And then she had to tell me what happened to her in that school so that she could die in peace. Because she had to tell somebody. They offered people money, for telling their stories. And she got the, the general payment for having suffered in that place. That was Spanish, Ontario. They called it Spanish because the school was near Espanola. She wouldn't tell her story, so she got just the general. She could have, but she didn't. And she told me they did terrible, dirty things to us in that school. And they told us that, we should be grateful that we're here because, you're sinners. There's no word in my language, and I don't think in any Indigenous language, for the word sin, and certainly not applied to children. And my mother, she told me, she said, I listened to that, and I thought, you people are going to be there in hell a lot sooner than any of us kids, because she didn't believe that children were sinful. She told me, too, that they would play games. They had a dumbwaiter that went up and down to bring the food. The kitchen was on the lower floor, and they would bring that up to where the people ate, where the kids ate. And one time, they had to wash the pots, and so to amuse themselves, they would take turns riding up and down in that dumbwaiter. And this nun was coming down the hallway, and this girl was halfway up, so they had to leave her there and pretend they were washing the pots. She would tell us funny stories like that. Because it didn't crush their spirits, they would not give up, even though they were often hungry. And they had to work to get the food. And they had little kids out there in the middle of November picking out potatoes with no gloves. They practiced experiments on us, too. And I know that they did that to the Jewish children and Jewish people. They thought it would be an interesting experiment to see what would happen if you didn't feed people. And they did that here in Canada. And they had passed laws for us not to be able to leave the reserve. All that stuff that they did in South Africa, the apartheid, they learned to do it from Canadians. And it was a black man from South Africa that told me, because I was being all sad about apartheid. I was shocked and horrified by it. And then he said, well, do you know where they learned to do that? And I said, no. I was in university by that time, so I was a young woman. And he told me they learned that here. Sarah Carter wrote a really good book called Lost Harvests. And that's a book that talks about those things. In 1918, when my mother was born, that was about the time that white women were getting the vote in this country. At that time, a group of chiefs from BC went to Ottawa because they wanted treaty. They wanted a part of the land that would be promised as it was promised to us in other parts of the country under the treaty, so many square miles per family. And the Senate met with them and told them, no, we're not going to give you land. Land in BC is too valuable. We'll give you a little pittance of money. And the chiefs, not being any fool, they said, no, we want to see you in court. We'll see you in court, is what they said. And then the laws changed, so it was no longer possible for Indigenous people to engage a lawyer. You couldn't go to court about anything. In fact, if a lawyer practiced and helped Indigenous people, they would be fined, they could be put in jail, and they could be disbarred. That's something they don't teach in Canadian history classes. Our people never ever gave up. My mother never ever gave up. She carried her sorrow, she raised her children to know joy, to value education too. And it was hard. I am a counselor, and I've been doing it for 40 years. And I am seeing children today who have been affected by the trauma of the residential schools and also by the trauma of the child welfare system, which is going on today. And we are working on our healing. My mother lived to see Stephen Harper make that apology in Parliament. And she said she never thought she'd hear that. And she said it was a good beginning, but not enough. Because one of the things I know for a fact is that whenever people are trying to tell you you are not worthy of being regarded as a human being, they are trying to separate you from your resources and your life. And we need to resist that. We need to resist. And our people have always resisted. My mother sent one telegram in her entire life. When the white paper in 1969 came out, when they were going to totally obliterate the existence of our treaties and everything else and wipe us out again with just the stroke of a pen, She sent a telegram to Mr. Trudeau Sr. to say no. And it is a very strange world about who gets to help you and who doesn't. It was actually the churches that came out and supported us not having that happen, right across the country. That's irony, isn't it? Well, that's why we're here having this conversation today. Because, you know, in some respects, for us it's not over yet. Because we're still dealing with what has happened and having people deny it in the Senate and being ignorant about it. Being ignorant is not wrong. It just means you don't know something. You can always learn. And the finding of the graves that are unmarked of those children that went to the residential school and did not come home. My mother had a friend who disappeared, and she wondered all her life what happened to that girl. And I've heard other people who are survivors speak the same words. Winnie and a whole bunch of other people. We knew about this. But to have it confirmed, it breaks your heart. It just breaks your heart. But here's the thing. Creator has given us life, and we are going to overcome all these things, and we're going to live. And we're going to have those 7 generations. That is what I know. And I know my mom hears my words. And I know our mothers are so filled with love for us. We say our mother is like the earth. The earth is our mother. She is the most loving and kind and beautiful of all mothers. So we can never be orphans because we are children of the earth. Chimagwach.
As a mother seeks out her children, so do we, in our tradition, have a special prayer for mourning. The words that it begins with are El Malei Rachamim, God full of compassion, and it asks that God takes the souls and binds them in the bundle of life. And so, as we find, as we discover, we take the memories of those that we have, the memories of those that have no one to remember them, and we bring them into the bundle of life.
We ask that you please rise. El Malei Rachamim, Shochen B'Meromim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina, B'Malot Kedoshim U'Tehorim, Kezohar Harakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmor Kol Acheinu B'nei Eretz Hazor, Anhashim Nashim V'Tov, Shenehergu V'Shenichneku, V'shenitchu me'al admatam, ומסורותיהם שנמחקו בשל גזענות ושנאת חינם בגן תהי מנוחתם. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתירם בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם. ונאמר
God, full of compassion, dwelling on high, find perfect rest beneath the sheltering wings of your presence, among the holy and pure who shine with the light of the heavens, for the souls of our brothers and sisters, our neighbors, the children of this land, men, women, children, who have been killed, burned, strangled, torn asunder, and uprooted, and had their traditions erased because of racism and baseless hatred. May the Garden of Eden be their resting place. Oh, please, Master of Compassion, keep them in the shelter of your wings for eternity, and bind up their souls in the bond of life. The source of all is their inheritance. May they rest in peace. And together we say, Amen. So now we turn to other music, and I'm honored that we have with us Nicole Levick, Nazarene, Indiana, and Isaiah, who are all with us today.
You want to speak first? Yeah.
And then I'll pass it to you. Ani, everyone. My name is, sorry, I don't know if you can hear me. My name is Nicole. Been a dancer for many years. My family is from Scarborough, Ontario, but traditionally, well, I know parts of my family. I don't know my birth mother. She left when I was young. So I was raised with my grandmother, Catherine Martel, who's Wendat from the Ottawa Valley region. And, you know, when the survivor spoke, when you said about your family, your parents coming here and having to hide and to blend in, that was something my grandmother knew very much about. You know, when she left that area and she came to Scarborough, it was a new time for her and my grandfather. So she used to tell me that, you know, our Wendat culture very much in secret. And I remember I was right along Kingston Road. I went to school. I was in grade 2, and I had a Native Studies book, I guess it was called. And I remember bringing it home, and my nanny would be like, "Where did you get that from?" Like there was this shock, right? And I said, "School," you know, because for me, I'm young, I said, "It's school." She said, "Can I read that?" I said, "Like, of course," you know. And I remember getting up in the morning, sitting at the table, like I did every day, having cereal with the little TV that was on top of our kitchen table, and her slapping this book down, and she said, "I don't know what this word is, but these are our people." And it was Huron on there, because that's the French word.
that was given to our people. So it was many years, I spent a lot of time with my nanny. She passed in 1995. I was a young mom, so I just had lost my first child earlier that year. And then I had my son, Justin, the year after in 1996. And that is, I learned years later on, that was when the last residential school closed, was in 1996. So my son, when I look at him, being 25, it's kind of, it's hard for me because I can see a living being within that time, and he's young to me, And so when I dance, and I have, my son's sister's here. He used to dance too. Isaiah used to teach him how to sing when he was young. But he doesn't dance much anymore. He's one of our fire keepers. But to give them that culture that they can say who they are, really means a lot to me, to be able to stand here with all of you amazing people and strong, strong families. It's an honor. And I normally, you'll see when I'll explain our style of dances in a minute, but you'll see that normally I had my running shoes on, and my daughters, they have theirs too, because sometimes when we dance on the concrete, it's hard, and I remember telling you about that. But, Rabbi, when you spoke about this being that stone from your homelands, I have to take those shoes off and dance in my moccasins. So when I dance in that, it's to honor your homelands in this, on top of our homelands, So we're going to do the two style of dances. I'll explain the first, and then Isaiah, you'll speak a bit about the singing and the drumming, and then I'll be dancing with Nazarene again, and we'll talk about that. So Nazarene in Indiana, they're in our jingle dresses. Now the story that I heard of where the dance originates from came from one of our elders who's from Secamac, Eleanor Pine. And at the time it was a short teaching, but it was 4 days. Normally it's much longer. So this is literally this is just a little window. It's almost like if we were sitting down and getting those teachings, you would happen to be walking by and peeking in for a second. So there's much more to this. But the origins of the dance come from a family, the White family, from Whitefish Bay. And it is said that during the last pandemic that there was a young girl who was very sick. And it was her father who saw their daughter very unwell and prayed. And they went to a ceremony called the Shishkan, the shaking tent ceremony, where they could speak to the spirits, and a vision of this dress came to them. From my understanding that there's 364 cones on a traditional jingle dress. Maggie White's dress was a very vibrant blue, like on those clear sky days, a little bit lighter than the blue here on your staircases. Beautiful dress. No feathers, no beadwork, just the dress. And when they went to the ceremony, once the dress was completed, they put it on Maggie, and she was healed from that sickness. And she actually lived to be a grandma. Eleanor Pine was lucky as a little girl to get teaching straight from Maggie White herself. The White family is also known as that knowledge keeper down in Whitefish Bay. And of course, it's evolved. It's evolved now to, I remember, Nazarene, when you first got your jingle dress, you might have been about Indy's age, Indy's 8, maybe 7, 8. Nazarene got your first jingle dress. And I remember we were at a powwow and there was lots of sickness from the family and there was lots of tobacco that was given to our jingle dress dancers to pray for that healing. And Nazarene said to me, "Oh, Mommy, this is lots of work." Much different than the fancy shawl, the style of dance I dance. So it's a great honor, but also a big responsibility for our jingle dress dancers to carry on that healing. I'm a jingle dress dancer as well, but today I'm in my fancy shawl for all of you. And they're going to dance with the tobacco that is offered for that healing of all of our little ones who are lost, and all of the loss that we've had from all of our family lines, and also too for what is coming. An elder last weekend said to me, you know, their family, they're a residential school survivor, and they said to me, you know, when we're dancing, we also have to pray for what's to come, not just of what we know now, but what will be coming, and to pray for that strength. So, and also too, when, Nazreen, do you want to stand up for a second? So you see these cones that are on the dress, and you see the points of the dress. They go up in that triangle shape that represents that shishkan, that shik tent ceremony. These are traditionally would be the lids of chewing tobacco, would be rolled into cones to make that sound. You'll hear it's the sounds of that water that brings that healing. Nazreen has her eagle feathers, and same with Indiana and myself. When we wear our eagle feathers, they're gifted to us, you know, for the roles, responsibilities, things that we've done in community. So, you know, when, as we know, you know, Elder Catherine, you know that when you get that eagle feather, it's like, I always say, like, you know, when we watch the Grammys and you see they get these big awards and they're like, oh, look, it's bigger than that. You've gotten one of the greatest gifts, because the eagle flies the highest, flies over those storm clouds. And when we wear them on our especially as dancers, wear them with our, on the back of our heads here, it's because that carries our prayer straight to the Creator. So from our head straight up, so that Creator can hear those prayers. Otters, you'll see that Nazreen and Indy, I have what's called ermine. They're on our hair to protect that braid. I don't know if in your culture you have that teachings of the braid, braiding together that mind, body, and spirit, and keeping it in balance and keeping them strong and together. Also too, that you know, that one strand of hair, much weaker than all of them together. And that is also us in our communities. You know, we go through these struggles from different places of the world, from different, you know, but that same kind of genocidal force that imposes themselves onto us. So it's like us together, sharing our stories, being here in the same space together, really brings us stronger together. So I think that's it. And I'll speak about the fancy shawl before I dance again, but Isaiah, did you want to speak to the drum and to the song that he's going to sing for the dance, for Indy and Nazreen?
How y'all doing? Well, my name is Isaiah Kada. I'm Ojibwe from Mississauga and Blind River, and born and raised here in Toronto. My grandmother and my grandfather, they were in residential schools too. They were in there together. My grandfather, one day he left on his own, and then he came back and got my grandmother from there. So he was kind of like James Bond, you know. But those things, like with that, they spoke the language. They did those things, but they weren't. They never gave it to their kids, and because we weren't allowed to do that, like everyone said so far, right? And so for me, my mother, she always wanted me to have that. She was like, since that was taken from her, she wanted to instill that into me, to have this culture and these things. And so that's what we want to do for our daughters, is to give them those things too, right? But just a little bit, just to explain a little bit about this drum. As I said, I'm Ojibwe, and in our language, this drum is called Odewegan. And the word Ode is heart. So this drum is the heartbeat of Mother Earth, they say. And with it, they say that it's birth memory, that this sound draws us to it. Right? because that's what we hear for those 9 months of when we're babies, right, being born in our mothers. We hear that sound, that heartbeat, right, boom, 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 and that's what draws us to it, is that sound, and it's that birth memory. And this is one of the oldest instruments, they say, is the drum. And but just a little bit of talking about that song that I'm going to sing. This is called a sidestep, the sa sakwe. It's the healing song of this dress that was made. So yeah, it's just for everyone's healing. It's just like a prayer song, kind of like. And when they do, a lot of the time, as you can see, they're both holding that tobacco and they're praying with it, just for that healing for everyone. So hope you all enjoy it.
I feel like the chair, like there's always something behind me. So I just wanted to speak a bit before I talk about my style of dance. As I said before, I've been dancing for many years now. As you know, through my grandma hiding our culture, I wasn't raised in it. So I had to learn. And luckily, I found a space at the Native Canadian Center that was practicing, it was a space for culture. So I remember the first time, actually it was before then, to be honest, like that was the space I knew we could learn, but I remember I was at Kennedy Station, Nazarene was little, very little, and I remember seeing this poster on the actual station, and it was huge, and it had a dancer, and it said, I think at the time they used that term, Aboriginal festival, and it was at the Sky Dome, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, so my cousin and I, we went, and I was transformed. I didn't know it at the time, but Isaiah was there singing. But we met at the Native Canadian Center. At the time he was teaching a singing class to the youth. I went to go and learn, because at that time, at that powwow, Nazarene was, like I said, she was small. She hopped out of the stroller and she went to touch one of the dancers' cones. It was a jingle dress dancer, just a little one. And I said, no, you can't. And she was, showed that urge to dance. And when I had gone to the Native Canadian Center, I started at a drum circle, learning some songs, some to sing, during ceremonies. And there was a lady from Thunder Bay area who had come to school at George Brown for fashion to learn how to make regalias. Deanne, her name now is Hupfield, at the time it was Morrison, and was doing a dance class and a regalia making class. And I said, okay, I want Nazarene, because she was little, she wanted to learn. She said, well, you have to, and because Deanne held that teaching, that I have come to see, to live it, is that if we want our young ones, it's that 7-generational, as you spoke about, Catherine, that if we have to pave that way for them. Indiana started dancing, danced here and there, with us, but really started coming into dancing during this pandemic. We would go to the encampments around the city to support our unhoused, and we would hold circles, and then also we dance every Thursday down at Wigwamen for our elders. As in our culture, our elders are very sacred to us. So, at that time where they couldn't come out, they couldn't be a part of community, we came and we brought, and we still do, we dance for them there. And that's actually Indiana's very favorite time, right, Indy, is to dance for the elders on Thursday. And they also learn how to jig. They do Métis-style jigging. So then after, Indy said, can I have a jingle dress, and started to dance. So that's my journey, and I have always been a fancy shawl dancer from the time. In Nazarene, that's where she started, and the story of the fancy shawl is much different than the jingle dress. The story that I know of the fancy shawl comes from the John family from Huon First Nation. Melvin John used to come to Toronto and come out to our visiting schools program, and we would go out to schools and teach. Both myself and Isaiah were a part of that program. And he would share the story, and I remember one time saying, Melvin, before you go back home, can I make you something? Can I sit with you? Can I, offer you a gift, some tobacco, so I could learn this story? And he said, well, what do you think you've been doing all this time? He said, just make sure that you let everyone know that you got your story from me. So it's kind of like when I went to university, it's that citing, right? But it's the traditional way. So that at the time, as we know, our culture was outlawed, just like a lot of our families. It was at a time just 2 Indigenous people in a space would have the law enforcement come. So our ceremonies and our dances became outlawed as well. And there was a time where it was allowed by that colonization by Buffalo Bill Cody show. And some of us might know of that Wild Wild West show. We might know of Sitting Bull, the very famous Sitting Bull being very famous from that, because they would go out during these Wild Wild West show, put on regalias and dance for that Buffalo Bill Cody show. And some of the oldest footage of our dances ever recorded was from that time, and it was our traditional dancers. And there was also too a gender binary that came on, because in our culture, especially my culture, Wendat culture, there is no male-female binary. There is our two-spirited individuals who have both and who are neither. And with that colonization came that women, men styles of dancing. So from that Wild Wild West show was a birthing of what's called the fancy feather, or the men's fancy dance. Traditional dancers would have one eagle bustle at the back, a few other, like a dance stick, and they would dance in time with that drum. So because it was a Wild Wild West show, they wanted more colors, a bigger bustle came on the back, the drum beat sped up, and it became that kind of faster beat and that faster showmanship. Like some of our fancy dancers can get down and do the splits on one drum beat and come right back up. So it's very a show of endurance and the beauty of our dances. And there was a young girl at the time who wanted to dance that style of dance, and during that time of that gender binary was like, okay, do I not dance this dance and just watch, or do I follow my heart? What do I do? So they decided to make a fancy regalia and disguise as a young man. And of course, that's now as one of my favorite authors, Gibran, talks about, it's our love made visible, our work, our heart's work. And of course, they wowed the community. They found out it was a young lady. Then our traditional dancers who would have a shawl on our arm took the shawl off their back and off their arm and put it on their back, and they began to lift their feet off of Mother Earth to honor that dancer. So my style of dance birthed from that. So there's the fancy feather, then the fancy shawl. And when the fancy shawl came into being, it reminded us, because everything we do in nature, it reminded us of that butterfly. And that butterfly teaches us transformation, moving forward. As we know, it was that caterpillar, chrysalis, it goes within, that self-reflection, and then birthed into that beautiful butterfly. Then that now pollinates and brings life into the world. So that's what we do as fancy dancers. We try our best to keep that balance. As we know, the wings are symmetrical, but the body of the butterfly lives between that balance of life. So if I spin on one side, I try my very best to do on the other side. If I do footwork on one side, it's to honor that balance in life, and also to bring that transformation in, and also to honor that how as we know, everything in life, it moves forward. So when Nazarene is going to dance with me today, just to balance out our two sides. Nazarene's going to get some more tobacco and dance, because we did that first dance for the ones that we've lost. But when Nazarene dances with me, it's going to be dancing for our survivors and for that resilience, for how out of those very deep tragedies and losses, there are those threads that are born into more and grow, so that we are able to, come out of that, honor our past, honor our loved ones, and bring them here into the present moment by us just living and just being, and then to change the world from what we want it to be and what we know it should be. So, Isaiah, did you want anything? I know you know another story of the fancy shawl. Remember that thing? I don't know if you want to share it, but maybe you want to talk about this song, because this song is going to be different, because it's going to be a straight song, right? Not that side step.
I don't know. Well, just a little bit about this song. It's a straight song. It's sung in vocalables and melodies. This isn't a word song. It's so what that is, it's like the universal language. Because if, say, a Mohawk person and an Ojibwe person were to be around each other, right? And the Mohawk person, they say sego. That's how they say hello. An Ojibwe person would be like anin. A Cree person would be like kanse. A Cree person from Moose Factory would say wache. So those are all different languages, right? So we couldn't sing our word songs together, so these are the songs, they're vocalables and melodies, so that we all could sing it together as one and be,
Incredible energy. Thank you. We're going to turn to a song of healing. I'll take this off for a second. We're going to turn to a song of healing and hope. It's found in the book of Psalms, this phrase from Psalm 89, and it's 3 Hebrew words, Olam Chesed Yibaneh, which essentially means that our world, the world we want to live in and the world that we want to build, should be built on kindness and on love. So I'd like for us to join in this song together, so we'll sing it a few times around, and I'll give you the opportunity to learn it. I'll hope you'll join in. And it starts with Hebrew words, Olam Chesed Yibaneh. Let's just try those words. Olam, Chesed, Yibaneh. And then there's English verses as well, which I will build this world from love. And then we ask that you build this world from love. So I will build this world from love, and you must build this world from love. And if we build this world from love, then God will build this world from love. So Olam Chesed Yibaneh.
Olam Chesed Yibaneh, Ya la 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 la, ya la la la. Olam Chesed Yibaneh, Ya la 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 la, ya la la la.
Let's just try that much. Ready? Here we go.
Olam Chesed Yibaneh, Ya la 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 la, ya la la la. Olam Chesed Yibaneh, Ya la 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 la, ya la la la. We go a little higher. Olam Chesed Yibaneh, Ya la 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 la, ya la la la. Again. Olam Chesed Yibaneh, Ya la 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 la, ya la la la. I will build this world from love. Ya la 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 la, ya la la la. And you must build this world from love. Ya la 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 la, ya la la la. And if we build this world from love, ya la 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 la, ya la la la, then God will build this world from love. Ya la 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 la, ya la la la. Olam Chesed, Olam Chesed Yibaneh. Let me hear you. Ya la la la. Olam Chesed Yibaneh, Ya la 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 la, ya la la la. Olam Chesed Yibaneh, Ya la 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 la, ya la la la. Olam Chesed Yibaneh, Ya la 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 la, ya la la la. I will build this world from love. Ya la 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 la, ya la la la. And you must build this world from love. Ya la la la, ya la la la. And if we build this world from love, ya la 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 la, ya la la la, then God will build this world from love. Ya la la la, ya la la. Olam Chesed Yibaneh, Ya la 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 la, ya la la la. Olam Chesed Yibaneh, Ya la 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 la, ya la la la.
Avra Rosen is the president of Holy Blossom Temple, and she has some gifts to present.
I prepared notes and my phone died. I'm trying to be paperless, so I'm going to wing it. This has been a really moving and special program this evening. First of all, Catherine, you started out by talking that we remember. That is really important for us here at Holy Blossom. On Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, we have a martyrology service in the afternoon. And all I can hear in my head as you were speaking was how we remember all the Jews that were persecuted and murdered from the very beginning of time through all the historical periods, of course, through to the Holocaust and even since. And so the crossover and the sharing of the experiences, which we should never have to share together, but the Jewish people and your people have shared, hopefully that is now ending with the reconciliation and how we move forward, as you talked about. But I think about the we remember. And Nicole, when you talked about our Jerusalem stone from our homeland being on your homeland, it was so powerful. I don't think I'll ever be able to sit here for our Jewish services in the main sanctuary and ever forget again how our home, this is my second home, I'm the president, but for most of us here, we, pre the pandemic, of course, we were here all the time. This is our home, but really our home is on your home. And so there are so many people to thank, and I'm not doing the thanks. I just want to tell you, for me at least, what this evening meant. And so what I'm holding in my hands is really a magnum opus. Rabbi Gunther Plaut, who was our senior rabbi from 1961 to 1977, was an incredible man. I had the privilege of knowing him. He was a learned man. He was a scholar. He loved to play tennis. And he was a great humanitarian, so much so that we here at Holy Blossom have the Gunther Plaut Humanitarian Award, which we give out to almost righteous Canadians who would follow in Gunther Plaut's footsteps as humanitarians. And he received both the Order of Canada and the Order of Ontario. And recently, on Rosh Hashanah, we presented the Gunther Plaut Humanitarian Award to Colonel Rick Hadfield, who of course was a commander of the space station, and before that, it was 2 years ago, it was Justice Rosalie Abella. And so Rabbi Plaut wrote this Torah, a modern commentary, which you can find probably in every single Reformed synagogue throughout North America. And it is my pleasure this evening, as part of our thanks, first, Catherine, I have yours here. So to you, Catherine, for Elder Catherine Brooks, with much gratitude for your gifts. Memory is the secret of redemption, Baal Shem Tov, and this is in friendship and in thanks, and for everything that you do and you will do for the future, it is with gratitude. Sure. And to Julie Cookson as well, with our gratitude for your gifts. Again, memory is the secret of redemption from the Baal Shem Tov, and we thank you for all that you're doing in the health center, and for, I know, what you're going to do in the future. Thank you for this evening.
Thank you, Avra. It has been a very full evening. I think we are full up. We are filled up with the smells, the senses, the sounds. Sukkot is a very sensual holiday with the feasting and the smell of the etrog and the four species, as you have the four medicines. And we're also filled with memory. We're filled with lineage, knowing where we come from, knowing to whom we belong. We're filled with gratitude. Sukkot is the holiday of thanksgiving and embracing God's bounty and doing our utmost to make sure it is shared in a fair way, in a just way. And we are filled, I think, also with appreciation for the common humanity that binds us all. There are many people to thank. It has been an evening of learning and careful listening. It has been an evening of witnessing. And I believe it's an evening that is really just the beginning. It feels like just the beginning of something important for our communities. On Thursday, we have the first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. Everyone will commemorate that day and honor that day uniquely. To the members of Holy Blossom Temple, I do urge you to spend time studying the 94 calls to action, because there is a time for listening and witnessing and learning, and there is a time for action and for deeds. And with just a few clicks, you can find your way to a response to the 94 calls. The work, in many ways, has already been prepared for us. It couldn't be clearer. The table has been set. And now it is up to each one of us to consider, how can we, as volunteers, how can we, as professionals, each in our own areas of expertise, what might we do to make things more right for the future, so the coming generations can flourish. That is how I'll be spending my Thursday. Many thank yous. First to Kalman Green, who is the chair of our Interfaith Committee here at Holy Blossom Temple. This has been a labor of love for Kalman, I know, for about a month or more now. He's been planning. So thank you, Kalman, for creating new friendships and new beginnings. Thank you to Lindsay Mockler and to Deanna Levy and to Ben Newey, all on our staff here at Holy Blossom who have been preparing. Thank you to our friends from the Leo Beck Day School, Daniel Abramson, who grew the tobacco with love and with great respect for the earth, and brought it to a Holy Blossom so we can share with our new friends. Thank you to Rabbi Helfman, who was the professional partner in bringing this day to fruition. Thank you to Faye and Michael, Faye Greenholtz, Michael Rothstein, for sharing their parents' stories. I know it is difficult to do, and we thank you for the strength to do so. Zichronam livracha, may their memories be for a blessing, and may you take strength in speaking their names and remembering all that they have taught you. And to Ava Rosen, always our temple president, to Cantor Rosen for bringing his song and offering the prayer to remember the innocent children whose lives have been lost. We thank Julie Cookson. We thank Nicole and Isaiah and Nezrin and Indiana for lifting us with your voices, with your sounds, and with your feet. In just a few short days, we have Simchat Torah, which is our next holiday, which is a lot of dancing. And you are welcome to join us. We're going to be in the parking lot this year. And we dance with our Torah scrolls. We dance embracing the law that has held our people together for 4,000 years or so. And most of all, it is my honor to thank my new friend, Elder Catherine Brooks. We spent about almost 2 hours together this week, and I learned so much just in that first meeting over the telephone, and I look forward to learning from you in the future. So you have the last word to conclude our time together today.
Ojo Chemanitu, we give you thanks for this time that we have spent together, and that we have shared our stories, we have shared our hearts, and we have shared our spirit, and we have been welcomed here, and we have been honored here, and we have welcomed and honored each other. I spoke of the 3 medicines. I didn't speak about the 4th medicine. That is sweetgrass. Sweetgrass is the hair of our mother, the earth. You pick those grass blades one at a time. You aren't supposed to pull the root up, because if you do that, there won't be more sweetgrass next time. The other thing is the sweetgrass, too, is like our women's hair and our men's hair. We braid it together to represent the mind, the body, and the spirit. The sweetgrass, if you look at the bottom, it's purplish. It's purple. Purple represents to us the color of community. The other thing the sweetgrass teaches, with one, you can easily destroy it, as you've said. But when we braid it together and we come together as community, as family, as friends, we're strong. Can't break us. And I am presenting this to you, Rabbi Plansky. Yeah. And this is for your sukkah.
It's beautiful. Thank you. We'll put it there right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
And with this, I will say the words that conclude. We've invited the spirits and the Creator to witness us. And we say Chemagwech to all the good spirits. We say Chemagwech to the Creator. And we say Miigwech, 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 Nikanagana, all my relations. And that ends our council together and our time together today.